Have you ever stopped to realize that you are treating life as if it were a test that needs to be passed, as if there were an invisible scoreboard marking your successes and failures, judging every move you make? The truth is that you are playing a game, but you are playing it the wrong way, and this changes absolutely everything when you finally understand. Alan Watts spent decades trying to awaken us to a reality so obvious that it has become invisible, so simple that our complex minds refuse to accept. Life is just a game, and the problem is not the game itself, but the desperate way you are trying to win it. You wake up every day carrying the weight of goals you never finish achieving, targets that multiply as soon as you get close, and a persistent feeling that you are late in a race where you don't even know where the finish line is. You are exhausted because you are trying to control every variable, force every outcome, ensure that nothing goes off the tracks you have carefully planned. But what if I told you that all this struggle, all this heroic effort to maintain control, is exactly what is preventing you from truly living the game of life the way it was meant to be played? Alan Watts observed people running back and forth, accumulating achievements, titles, possessions, as if they were trying to build a fortress against impermanence, and he saw in this hustle a comic tragedy. A tragedy because we waste our existence chasing ghosts, and comic because it is so absurdly unnecessary. He asked why we treat life as a problem to be solved, when in fact it is an experience to be lived, a game to be played lightly, not with the suffocating weight of the need to win at all costs. When you were a child, you knew how to play naturally. You didn't worry about whether you were doing it right or wrong. You simply played, allowed yourself to flow with the moment, laughed when you fell, and got up to continue the game. But then something happened. Society taught you that life is not a game, that you need to be serious, productive, useful, that every moment needs to have a purpose that contributes to something greater in the future. And so you stopped playing and started working, stopped flowing and started forcing, stopped living, and began to exist only functionally. The great mistake, the one that turns the game of life into an unbearable burden, is believing that there is a right way to play, that there are fixed rules that must be followed, and that the ultimate goal is to accumulate enough points to justify your existence. You look around and see people achieving things and immediately assume that you are losing, that you are falling behind in this imaginary game where everyone is your competitor. But Watts reminds us that this is a devastating illusion. Life is not a competition where someone wins and everyone else loses. It is a game where each player is creating their own experience, their own unique dance with existence. When you finally understand this, when you truly absorb this simple truth, something changes profoundly within you. You realize that you have spent years, perhaps decades, playing a game that no one really invented, following rules that no one actually established, trying to win a prize that does not exist. Eastern philosophy, which Alan Watts translated to the West with impressive clarity, speaks of something called wu wei, which literally means not forcing, non-action. It is not about being passive or lazy, as many mistakenly interpret. It is about acting in harmony with the moment, without unnecessary resistance, like water flowing around stones, without ever trying to push them aside. You have probably experienced this in rare moments of your life, when you were so absorbed in an activity that you completely lost track of time, when your actions flowed naturally without conscious effort, when you were not thinking about doing, you were simply doing. These moments are glimpses of how the game of life should be played all the time, without the constant interference of the mind that wants to control, plan, ensure, protect. But the mind has been trained to distrust this natural flow. It has been conditioned to believe that if you are not struggling, you are not progressing, that relaxing is synonymous with failing. Alan Watts used to say that the meaning of life is simply to be alive. It is so obvious that it goes unnoticed, so simple that our complex minds reject it as being too superficial. But think about it for a real moment, not just as a beautiful concept, but as a visceral truth. You do not need to justify your existence. You do not need to prove your worth. You do not need to achieve anything to deserve to be here. You are already here, and that is enough. The game of life does not have as its ultimate goal the accumulation of achievements, but the full experience of every moment that you are alive. When a child plays, they are not thinking about what they will gain from it. They are completely immersed in the play for the sake of play. And this is the wisdom you lost as you grew up and that you now desperately need to regain. If you can take a step back from the crazy rush you have turned your life into and observe honestly, you will see that you are playing the game of life the wrong way, simply because you are trying to win it instead of living it. Every moment you spend worrying about the future, anxious about outcomes, trying to control variables that are beyond your reach, is a moment when you are not really present in the only place where life happens, which is now. And if you keep thinking about the future, the end of the game will come without you ever having truly been present, without you ever having really played. If this first block resonated with you, if something inside you recognized this truth that you have been trying to ignore, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of awakening, and in the comments, tell us which city you are watching from. I love to know where the people who are ready to play the game of life in a completely new way are. Now that you have started to see that you are playing the game of life the wrong way, we need to go deeper into this understanding because it is not enough just to know intellectually. You need to feel this in every cell of your body until it completely transforms how you relate to existence. Alan Watts noticed that people lived in a constant state of escape, frantically running toward an imaginary future where they would finally be safe, happy, fulfilled, while the present, the only moment that truly exists, goes completely unnoticed. You do this all the time, postponing real life until you have enough money, until you get that promotion, until you find the right person, until the conditions are perfect. But the conditions are never perfect, and while you wait for life to start, it is happening and ending without you noticing. The game of life is not happening in the future. It is happening now, at this very moment, and you are missing every move because your mind is anywhere but here. There is a profound insanity in how our civilization has trained us to live. We have been taught that a person's value lies in what they produce, in what they accumulate, in the status they achieve. And then you spend decades doing things you don't want to do, to impress people you don't know, buying things you don't need, chasing goals that aren't even yours, but were implanted in your mind by a culture obsessed with growth, achievement, progress. Alan Watts called this the trap of life, where you spend the best years of your existence doing things you hate so that you can eventually do what you love. But when you finally get there, if you even do, you are so conditioned, so exhausted that you don't even remember what you really love anymore. It's like spending your entire life furiously rowing against the current, exhausted, frustrated, feeling like you are getting nowhere, when you could simply let go of the oars and let the current take you, flow with it instead of against it. The concept of Wu Wei, which we mentioned earlier, is not a technique you need to master. It is a return to your original nature, to the way you already knew how to live before you were programmed to control everything. Observe the nature around you. Trees do not struggle to grow. Birds do not force themselves to fly. Rivers do not fight to reach the sea. Everything happens naturally without resistance, following the path of least effort. But you, with all your intelligence, decided that you know better than nature, that you need to force, control, manipulate every aspect of your life to ensure that things go the way you want. And the result of this is obvious. You are exhausted, anxious, frustrated, because you are constantly swimming against the tide, trying to make the river flow upwards. Alan Watts invites us to experience the opposite, to let go of this obsessive need for control and see what happens when you simply trust the flow of life. This does not mean that you become passive or lazy, as many misinterpret. It means that you act when action is natural, when it arises spontaneously from the situation, not because your anxious mind is forcing you to do something to avoid an imagined fear. Have you ever noticed that your best ideas, your most effective actions, happen when you are not desperately trying, when you are relaxed, confident, present? It is in those moments that you are truly aligned with the game of life, playing the right way, without forcing, without resisting, simply being. But most of the time you are stuck in your head, planning, worrying, ruminating about the past, or anxious about the future, and thus completely miss the present moment where real life is happening. Alan Watts had a way of exposing the absurdity of our way of living that was both funny and devastating. He said that we treat life as if it were a journey from point A to point B, and the faster we get to point B, the better. But if life were really about reaching the final destination, then the point of greatest success would be to die as quickly as possible, because you would have achieved the goal with maximum efficiency. When you see it put that way, you realize how ridiculous this goal-oriented mentality is, this obsession with future destinations instead of the present journey. Life is not a race to get somewhere. It is a dance, it is music, it is a game that you play for the pleasure of playing, not for the final outcome. When you watch a symphony, You do not become impatient, waiting for it to end so that you can finally enjoy it. You appreciate every note, every movement, every moment of the music as it unfolds. Your life should be exactly like that, each moment appreciated for itself, not as a means to reach some better future. But you have been conditioned to continuously postpone gratification, to sacrifice the present for the future, and that is the wrong game. The game that never ends because there is always one more goal, one more achievement, one more thing you need to accomplish before you finally allow yourself to be at peace. Alan Watts saw that the most successful people by social standards were often the most miserable because they spent their entire lives chasing external things instead of cultivating inner wealth, inner peace, inner presence. They won the game that society defined, but lost the real game, which is the ability to be alive, present, aware in every precious moment you have. The question you need to ask yourself now with total honesty is, how many moments of your life have you really lived compared to the moments you spent just functioning automatically, trapped in thoughts, worries, fantasies about the past and future? If you are brutally honest, you will probably recognize that you have spent most of your life asleep, not literally, but asleep to the reality of the present moment, to the living experience of being here now. And the awakening that Alan Watts points to is not some complicated mystical experience. It is simply waking up to the fact that you are alive now, that this moment is the only real thing you have, and that the game of life happens here, not in some imagined future. When you truly absorb this, when it stops being just a beautiful idea and becomes your lived reality, everything changes. You stop postponing life, you stop waiting for perfect conditions, you stop playing the wrong game of accumulation and achievement, and you start playing the true game of presence and experience. And ironically, when you stop desperately chasing success, when you relax into the natural flow of life, things begin to happen much more easily because you are no longer blocking the flow with your neurotic need to control every detail. We now arrive at the heart of Alan Watts's teaching about the game of life, the understanding that has the power to completely free you from the mental prison in which you have been living without even realizing it. The deepest and at the same time simplest truth is this: you are not a separate player playing the game of life. You are the game itself manifesting, you are life happening, not a separate entity trying to control life. This distinction may seem subtle, but it is absolutely revolutionary when you truly understand it, because it destroys the fundamental illusion that causes all your suffering. The illusion that you separate from the rest of existence, struggling to survive, competing for resources, trying to prove your worth. Alan Watts spent years exploring this illusion of the separate ego, showing how it is the root of all anxiety, all fear, all feelings of inadequacy that you carry. You believe you are a small isolated self within a body, surrounded by a potentially hostile universe, and from this fundamental belief arises all kinds of defensive, controlling, anxious behavior. But what if this is completely false, and what if you are not a separate entity, but rather a unique expression of the entire universe, just as a wave is not separate from the ocean, but is the ocean itself manifesting in a particular form? When you see this, really see it, not just understand it intellectually, you realize that there is nothing to prove, nothing to defend, nothing to conquer, because you are already the totality expressing itself in this specific form. The game of life is not about you trying to win against other players or against life itself. It is about the universe playing with itself, exploring all the possibilities of existence through infinite forms, and you are one of those forms. This should be extremely liberating because it means that you cannot really fail. You cannot play wrong, in the ultimate sense. You can only forget that you are playing and start taking everything dead seriously. Alan Watts observed that small children know how to play perfectly because they have not yet developed that heavy sense of a separate ego. They simply are, flowing from one moment to the next without carrying the weight of the past or the anxiety about the future. But then, gradually, society implants in them this idea that they are separate entities that need to compete, conquer, prove their worth, and the magic is lost, the lightness disappears, and the game turns into a struggle. And now, as an adult, you are stuck in this mode of struggle, treating each day as a battle to be won, each interaction as a transaction where you need to come out ahead, each moment as a step you need to step on to rise higher. It is exhausting, it is unsustainable, and fundamentally it is unnecessary because it is based on a false premise. the premise that you are separate from life and need to fight against it to get what you need. The approach of Wu Wei of not forcing only makes sense when you realize that there is really nothing you need to force, that life is already happening perfectly, and all you need to do is stop resisting it, stop trying to control it, and simply dance with it. This is not passivity or resignation. It is deep trust in the intelligence of life, the same kind of trust that allows your heart to beat without you needing to think about it, that allows your body to heal wounds without you needing to consciously manage the process. There is an intelligence operating through you that is infinitely wiser than your conscious mind, and when you relax into neurotic control, this intelligence can express itself freely. Have you ever experienced this in moments of flow, when you were so absorbed in something that you disappeared and only the activity remained, and then you looked back and were surprised by what you accomplished without conscious effort? Alan Watts challenges us to live like this all the time, not just in rare moments of grace, but as our constant reality. And he says that the only thing preventing this is our resistance, our insistence that we know better than life about how it should be. Every time you catch yourself feeling anxious, ask yourself, what am I resisting in this moment? What am I trying to force to be different from what it is? And then, as an experiment, see if you can let go of that resistance just for a moment, allow things to be exactly as they are without trying to change them, and observe what happens. Often, what you will discover is that the resistance itself was creating the problem, and when you let go, the problem dissolves or transforms into something entirely different. The right way to play the game of life, then, is not through more effort, more control, more planning, but through less resistance, less force, less. Attempt to make life conform to your plans. It is a paradox that the logical mind struggles to accept because we have been conditioned to believe that more effort always leads to better results. But Alan Watts shows us that there is a different wisdom operating here, a wisdom that understands that the greatest things happen when you get out of the way and allow life to express itself through you, instead of trying to force it to go where you think it should go. Perhaps the greatest insight of all is this: the meaning of life is not to arrive at some place or to become something different from what you are. The meaning of life is simply to be alive, to fully experience each moment, to play the game with joy and lightness instead of desperate seriousness. You are already whole, you are already enough, you are exactly what you should be at this moment, and all suffering comes from forgetting this simple truth and starting to believe that you need to be something more, something different, something better. When you remember who you really are, not the little ego with all its fears and ambitions, but the vast consciousness that is experiencing life through this particular form, you relax deeply and the game becomes pure joy. Alan Watts lived and taught this message with a passion that still resonates decades after his death, because he clearly saw the tragedy of people wasting their precious lives chasing things that will never bring real satisfaction, playing a game they can never win because the rules were made to keep them always dissatisfied, always wanting more. And he offered a radical alternative. Stop playing that game. Wake up to the reality that you already have everything you need in this moment, that life is to be savored, not conquered, that you are the universe experiencing itself, and there is nothing you need to prove. When this truth really sinks in, you free yourself from the self-imposed prison of the ego and discover a whole new way of existing, light, joyful, fluid, confident, because you finally understood how to play the game of life the right way. If this message has touched something deep within you, if you recognize that you have spent your life playing the wrong game and are ready to awaken to a whole new way of living, give it a like, subscribe to the channel to continue receiving this transformative wisdom, and in the comments, share which insight impacted you the most and from which city you are watching us. Let's create a community of people who are truly alive, not just existing.